welcome everyone to our summer series, and I have with me Tim Watson-Munro, who we had a chat with earlier in the year. Tim is a criminal psychologist who's had an extensive background in working with people in the prison system or facing the justice system, I suppose is the way he would describe it. He's done forensic reports or criminal reports on something like 30,000 individuals, which I just found extraordinary. But he's probably had a 30 or 40-year career. So welcome, Tim.
Thank you, Kathy. It's a pleasure to be back. And I don't know what's happened to the time. I think it was back in March that we spoke, and it was all about coping with COVID. So here we are. We've survived so far.
Yeah, we've all survived, but I guess we're all coming to the end of the year and we're all saying, oh, I'm so over it, or we found different ways of coping. How's your year been?
Look, it's been quite different, but, you know, I'm one of the fortunate few, I think, in this sense that I was able to relocate from Melbourne. I had a daughter who was in New York that was the impetus for this. She was living in Brooklyn when we did that interview back in March, and she rang me one morning and said there's semi-trailers parked down the street with bodies in them. They were ice trucks because they didn't have enough places in the morgue. She'd lost her job in a gallery due to COVID, lost her visa and health insurance. So I said, look, you've got to come back to Australia. We'll fight about it next week because she was very, very well settled there. But, you know, she conceded it was the right decision. So she came back to Melbourne, and when Dan Andrews lifted the level 3 lockdown, I could see where this was probably trending. So I said, let's get out of here. So we hopped in my car and we drove to the Northern Rivers district of New South Wales. And I've been happily ensconced here for the past 7 months. I wondered whether my practice would survive COVID, as a lot of people did. I mean, most of the work I get is referred to me by lawyers, and it was an interesting time for them. A lot of lawyers were not equipped to deal with this sort of change. They were not technologically au fait with, you know, things like Zoom and all the rest of it. They rapidly learned. So there was a hiccup of about 2 weeks. And then I'm the eternal optimist. I thought it would be okay. But in actual fact, it's been very okay. My practice hasn't suffered at all. And I've now found, I think, what I've been trying to do for decades, which is the perfect balance between quality of life and working. You know, for many, many years, in fact, I wrote about this, I was super stressed. You know, I was flying between Sydney and Melbourne every week. I calculated one year I spent 400 hours of that year either on planes or hanging around airports, just to give you some idea of what it was like.
My goodness, yeah.
So now I don't have to fly anywhere. I can work online. I have discussions with people like I'm doing with you, and my life quality is dramatically improved. I walk the beach, but I'm very mindful of how lucky I am, and I'm very mindful of how difficult it's been for most people globally, particularly, and also in Australia.
So, I mean, it's great. I've heard lots of people pivoting and good things have happened, and we tend to focus on the bad things too often. And I know at this time of the year, everyone's saying, I'm so tired, I just need a break. How has that impacted, you know, your business? You now say that you do most things via Zoom. Have you pivoted at all in terms of the way, you know, extra things you're doing, or not really?
Well, I'm still doing assessments for court. I'm probably doing less criminal work. I'm doing work in other jurisdictions. I'm writing another book when I get time. And I've also been involved in the production and appearing in a major documentary series, which is going to air on Channel 7 in February, which is revisiting the very, very bad crimes from probably the very, very worst criminal in recent times in Australia, Ivan Milat. And we've been looking whether there were more victims. We believe there were, based on evidence and not just my expertise, but I've been working with Dr. Xanth Mallet, who's an eminent criminologist and forensic anthropologist. We've had the involvement of the FBI and profilers using all this
Wow.
amazing technology, including LiDAR, which is like it goes up on a drone and can take like X-ray photographs of forests and can give you an idea of the topography that you would never get when you're walking the ground, looking for buried secrets, really. So I've enjoyed that in terms of the creativity, working with creative people, EQ Productions and Channel 7, and it's been a learning experience for me. And, you know, so I'm always keen to learn new tricks and learn about things. So I have pivoted in that way.
Did it come about? I mean, did you know the production company, or how did it come about? Or were you involved in the Arvin Milat trial at all?
No, I wasn't. I'd certainly given some opinions about Milat when in fact, before he was arrested. I was doing some profiling, mainly for the press, and I had some discussions, as I recall. It's a long time ago with the police, but not in an official capacity. I said, you know, he's a serial killer, and I suspect he's very organised. He's a marauder. He'll probably live close to the Hume Highway. Guess what? All that was true, not because of my wisdom, but it panned out that way. That's how they operate. But look, I've been in discussions with EQ and various producers for a while about doing something like this, and we just got our heads together and you know, we pitched it, and I think it's going to be a great doco. Really, it'll be very interesting.
And that's on 7 in February.
Yeah, I think it's on the 7th or the 14th of February.
Okay.
It's 4 one-hour episodes bunched into a block of 2 hours each, and 7 are now pitching it, and the feedback's been very positive. So I hope to do more of that. I'm at a time in my life where it's good to share your knowledge. I think you would know all about that, of course.
Yeah, I do indeed. I do indeed. So tell me, what is, I mean, being a profile, you're not really a profiler, are you? I mean, you do assessments is what you, but over the years, you've developed such skill that you can pinpoint, you know, pretty much what's going on. How do you balance the dark side of human beings with, you know, trying to have some balance in your own life? Because it's pretty sinister stuff that you do.
Yeah, I've really been immersed in the dark side, actually, for 42 years.
Yeah.
The first job I had was, I was the resident psychologist at Parramatta Jail in 78. And it was a very bad jail then, and I was very young. I was 25. So you can imagine what it was like for really a novice, dumped into the deep end, really with not a lot of world experience, but you know, I swam, I didn't drown. To answer your question, I mean, you know, it took me years, if not decades, to get to a point of finding some balance in my life. And, you know, the next step up from that is what I'm doing now. I'm living in a much better environment. You know, my children visit me when they can regularly. One of my sons came up last weekend. I hadn't seen him for 7 months because he was in Melbourne. We communicated every day. I'm very close to all my kids. I love them dearly, but that was hard for all of us. My oldest daughter's been with me, and that's been a good sense of connection with family, which I think is very important. I think it's very difficult for those that don't have homes and don't have families, particularly in the age of COVID. So, you know, I'm working, and, you know, my typical routine now is I get up early, I read, I walk the beach for an hour, and I've been doing that every day for 7 months. And then I work during the day, and at the end of the day, now particularly because it's warm, I go and have a surf. So I've found that balance, you know. It's been, I wish I'd been able to do it 20 or 30 years ago, to be honest, but, you know, life bowls you over, as you know.
It does indeed. So confinement, which is what we spoke about in March when we had Anna Yusum, the spiritual psychiatrist, and Ingrid Ozels join us. We were talking, we were talking about what that actually meant. We're now, 10 months, 11 months through being forced to confine, and at the moment on the northern beaches in Sydney, we've just been, I don't live on the northern beaches, but they've just been told they're staying in for Christmas. And when everyone's dying to get out, go to the beach and do sorts of things, how do you think people are going to cope after, you know, such a roller coaster of a year?
Well, I did worry about that. because it's like the elusive, carrot that you're forever chasing. And we all hoped that we had virtually reached a point of elimination. So people's hope went up, and particularly in Melbourne, where they've been locked down for so long. And when this cluster erupted, my remaining adult kids, who are hopefully joining me in the next few days, were extremely anxious that yet again they wouldn't be able to come to see me, not because of problems in Victoria, but problems in New South Wales. I think it's going to be difficult for people. I mean, Christmas is a very important time of year. It's a spiritual time of year. And it's not just a Christian festival, it's a time for families to get together. And I think, you think about people who've been wanting to go to Western Australia, for example, not been able to see their parents or their kids or their relatives. I think it's going to be very difficult for them. And I think too, that this cluster has acted as a trigger. So it's important, I think, to recognise that although it may seem the same, it's not necessarily the same, because we've become more sophisticated in the way that we approach COVID. It's still a boogeyman, but it's not lurking in every corner in the way that I certainly thought it was 10 months ago. I didn't go outside in Melbourne for about 2 weeks. My kids would bring me groceries. Everyone was very concerned, but I think we've got a better handle on what you need to do to stay safe. But notwithstanding all that, given what's happened with this latest cluster and the fear of being locked in, people, I think, realistically, when I say realistically, I can understand how they're feeling. It pulls them back to where they were months and months ago. It's a form of post-traumatic stress, I think, that the various triggers, and then the unconscious mind starts to work. How do they cope with that? As I said back in February, March, deal with the things you can control, stay in charge, and, it may be hard, but try and stay positive. Don't sweat the stuff you can't deal with. But, I think in New South Wales it's being handled pretty well. I don't think we're looking at a repeat of Victoria by any means. It's a different dynamic altogether, as far as I can tell so far.
Yeah, and I would agree. I mean, I guess I worry about, there's a feeling of exhaustion amongst everybody that, everyone's hanging out for a rest, whatever that might mean. And in Australia in particular, it's traditionally, last week before Christmas, we're all on holidays and we don't come back until really mid to late January. And now people feel as though they had the guts kicked out of them. Some people were doing road trips. And I worry about whether or not we're going to be able to rest and recover to start the year and be productive.
It's a very good point. And it is a time of rest and recuperation, a time of renewal in many ways. And if they can't do that, it could have serious implications for people's mental health, I think. If you've been hanging out for Christmas, hoping it would pass, reunifying with family and so on, and that doesn't eventuate, and you're stuck at home, even if you're not stuck at home, but you can't get away, planning to go to Queensland, for example, that's going to be on the agenda now. So I think it is going to be tough. But hopefully this thing will pass, within the next week or so. But then Christmas has come and gone, hasn't it?
Yeah, well, as the media hasn't done us any favours by talking about the rush to save Christmas. It's almost like a Santa story.
Yes.
And that's not a positive image or story to be putting out there, particularly with little ones around who are excited about Santa and the whole Christmas notion.
I agree with that. I think that there's been some very irresponsible journalism in relation to this, and it's pressing buttons for some people, and kids in particular,
Which comes down to online hygiene, is you really only need to be listening to the 11 a.m. in New South Wales press conference, listening to where the hot spots are, and then stay away from it. Try and occupy yourself with other things.
I agree, and this isn't all about me, but one of the things I've noticed in terms of the recalibration of how I do things, my screen time has dropped dramatically. certainly early doors in 2020, I was glued to the TV. I wanted to know what was going on, particularly with one of my kids in New York. But I watch the 6 o'clock news now, and I might watch the press conference, but the rest of it, I say, well, I'll find out more tomorrow. I'm trying to maintain my online hygiene as best I can. I think it's a wise thing to do.
Absolutely.
24-hour news cycle, you don't know what's going on half the time if you're glued to the TV.
Absolutely. So tell us about your writing, because that's something that's happened later in life, that you've written a couple of books. You've got another one under development. Do you have a rigid routine that you sort of get up and write from 5 o'clock until 7 and then go for a beach walk, or how does the flow work?
No, I don't. It's very interesting. I interviewed Michael Rowbottom at the Sydney Crime Writers Festival. And for those who don't know Michael, he's probably our greatest fictional crime writer. He's been published overseas and sells millions of copies. Lovely bloke, lives at Avalon Beach, as it turns out. But I asked him about his writing routine. He said he gets up and he does it religiously. And I said, when you complete a manuscript, do you have a break? And he said, yeah, for a day. And then I start writing again. So I'm probably the antithesis of that. I write when I'm in the mood, because I think that's when you do your best writing. And I really understand the notion of writer's block, that if you're not in the zone, you're not going to put out stuff that's really all that good, in my view. Whereas for me, when I am in the zone, I can keep going and going, and it works very well for me. But I think for me, because I wear so many different hats, it's often difficult to juggle those different requirements of my time. Because, my criminal work, the court work, that takes up a lot of my time during the day. It's the bread and butter of what I do. And at the end of the day, I'm generally pretty exhausted, to be honest, particularly working online. I find you've got to concentrate more, you've got to be more focused, you've got to set it all up. But when I'm relaxed and in the zone, and I'm hoping over the next, 6 weeks, because I've now officially stopped work today, I'll be zooming through the zone and writing well. But I really enjoy it when I'm doing it. You dissociate, and it's a very pleasurable thing to do.
So what made you get into, did you want to find a way to tell your stories? I mean, the vast experience. I mean, I spoke to a barrister who'd been originally an insurance lawyer, and he did it as therapy. He just hated being an insurance lawyer so much. He had to get it out of his system before he wrote other things. Was it like that for you initially, or you just felt that you wanted to tell this?
Look, it was very cathartic for me. I mean, I had a well-publicised fall from grace 21 years ago. I had a problem with cocaine. I was severely depressed, anxious. There was a lot of opprobrium surrounding that period of my life. And I think for me, part of resolving it for me was to tell the story. But beyond that, I mean, it's an educative story. A lot of people have written to me saying, well, I've gained so much insight and benefit from reading your books because I've been in dark places and I can see how you can get out of it. And it sort of made me a bit more human, that process, I think. So I wanted to tell the story. I wanted to educate people. And, we all harbour fantasies of being a writer. So I guess it was fulfilling that desire as well. And the first one sold very well. So I wrote another one and it sold very well. And the third one, I think, is, it's a book on why men hurt women.
Wow.
I think that's going to be challenging because there'll be something in there for everybody, but, obviously a few noses are going to get out of joint, particularly amongst my male compatriots. But it's something that needs to be said from a male's perspective, I might add, but I've interviewed a lot of women too, who give me their take on it. It's interesting. And it's such a relevant problem.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have a snippet you could share with us just as a teaser? What do you feel? Do you feel there's a core issue or not necessarily?
Look, I think there's many. There's cultural issues, there's religious issues, there's social learning issues, there's substance use issues. breakdown of relationships, jealousy, misogyny, men viewing women as chattels, possessions, objectifying them, and diminishing them. It's not just about killing women, although in this country so far this year, I think we've lost one a week on average.
Yeah.
One woman has been murdered. And that's just, in my view, the tip of the iceberg. So violence towards women is not just about bashing them up, it's about emotional abuse, it's about financial abuse, it's all those sorts of dynamics that come to play. And what tends to happen is that when women say, look, I've had enough, and they start to push back against that, I don't want to be controlled, I want to be my own person, I want to have a life, it doesn't mean that I'm going to form a new relationship. That's when it escalates to, all sorts of manipulation, more violence, more pushback, and tragically, once a week in Australia, a woman being murdered. So
Yeah.
it's not for
I spoke,
light-hearted, this book, that's for sure, faint-hearted.
yeah, I spoke to Kate Eastman, who's a human rights barrister, this morning, and we were talking about sexual harassment in the workplace, which we've done a lot of, from our chaplaincy, a lot of support of victim survivors this year. And the thing that I find just so extraordinary, Tim, is the men, mostly men at board level, cannot grasp how serious it is. They don't get it. And these are men that I probably played with in the school playground. Like, there are now positions of power, and they don't get that it can do irreparable damage to a woman's sense of self, and the shame that's wrongly inflicted on the victim.
I agree with you, and I think the big mistake is to think that this is a working class phenomenon. It's right across every strata of society. It's in the factories of Australia and the world. It's in the cotton fields of, third world countries and elsewhere, and it's in the boardrooms of all countries and in Australia too. And it's this sense of entitlement, isn't it? And utilising power to manipulate women into being sexually compromised. And of course, you would know through your discussions with others that when women say no, there's often serious consequences for them in terms of their future careers, which speaks to the fragile egos of the perpetrators, I think. It is quite a problem. But look, I think we're becoming better educated. There's certainly been some high-profile cases about this. And for those blokes that don't get it, they need to get on the page, really, because this is not something that's going to change. Not at all. I'd be interested separately to talk to you about this, if I may, if you're interested.
Yeah, sure.
Put something in the book about it, because your perspective, I think, would be very interesting.
So, just out of interest, have you had any dealings with people in the prison system this year, that how they're coping at all, or not necessarily?
No, I have. Corrective services in New South Wales have a very good telehealth AVL system in play now. And I was starting to use this pre-COVID because I decided I wasn't going to travel as much, but I wanted to keep working. So I've seen a lot of people in various jails, certainly in New South Wales and in Victoria, and it's been very difficult for them, not only because of the fears they've had about contracting COVID, early doors, where people didn't know what it was and where it was. And there was a lot of research coming from overseas about jails in the US, for example, where, COVID was going through the roof because there was no COVID practices put in place, and people were understandably anxious here as well. Fortunately, I don't think it's been a problem in prisons in Australia. I'm not aware of it being a problem. But the other dimension to it is, because of COVID, there's been, until very recent times, no contact visits. So prisons organise what they described as video visits with their families. But it ain't the same, is it? It's not the same.
No, it's not.
Sitting in a room with someone you care about and love, reassuring themselves that everyone's okay. It's so kind of two-dimensional, doing stuff on a video, but at least we've got that. And, you know, I wonder how we would have coped with COVID pre-internet days. It would have been psychologically disastrous and
Or
commercially.
pre-Zoom. I mean, thank goodness for Zoom. I mean, imagine their business. Extraordinary. Yeah.
Well, Zoom's been fun.
So I guess just to wrap up, because I think you touched on it, spirituality, people, as I often say, get confused. They think it's all about religion, and it's not necessarily. It's about your sense of meaning and purpose, you know, connection in life. For this season, how do you think people, you know, what tools can they use at home with their families, if they're extended families in another location? How can they practically manage this so they feel connected and they feel together in a really difficult time?
Well, I think we all have, in varying degrees of intensity, survived this so far. And, you know, I can only speak from my personal experience of being separated from the majority of my family for in excess of 7 months, basically. And, you know, they were fretting too. But I said, look, this will pass. We're alive. We're healthy. There are people in other countries that are in a way worse position than we are. And difficult as it is, you've got to bear that in mind. You know, stay positive, stay optimistic. But then that sort of segues into what we discussed earlier. We've all been doing our best to stay positive and look for the light at the end of the tunnel, bring on Christmas. And, you know, 1 week out, we've got this potential, you know, catastrophe occurring in the northern beaches. But the figures today suggest that it's being well managed and sensibly managed, and I'm very pleased about that. So I think you've just got to roll with the punches. It's what it is. Keep the communication going. If you can't be with somebody you love in Christmas, make sure you communicate with them in the way that we're communicating. We've got videos, and, you know, without sounding smug about it, despite how bad it is here, and could have been bad and worse, we're in a way better position than people overseas. I feel and fear for the homeless in Australia at this time. What are they going to do? Who are they going to see? What are they, you know, the usual problems I think that homeless people encounter at this time of year are clearly going to be accentuated because of COVID. Spare a thought for those people. Count your blessings in some way. Do you know what I'm saying? It's
yeah, a good dose of gratefulness. It sounds like this is what we've got. Aren't we lucky to live in Australia where it has been well managed?
I think so. And, you know, in saying that, it doesn't diminish what people are going through.
No,
you know, we've all suffered at various levels, but it could have been so much worse.
Yeah,
I'm grateful for.
Thanks for joining us.
It's always a pleasure. And I will be in touch about the book if I may. So,
awesome. Thanks, Tim.
Have a great Christmas, Kathy.
You too.
Thanks for all you do. You do a great job.
Yeah. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
See you later.